a whisper of talent, hidden beneath layers of ordinary. Mira Castillo cleaned the Harrington Academy's floors by day, but at night, her fingers danced across forgotten keys with a genius that would shake the elite music world to its core. When opportunity and humiliation collide, the woman they never truly saw would finally be heard. The question wasn't if she would play, but if they were ready to listen. Before we dive into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from. The fluorescent lights of Harrington Academy flickered overhead as Mira Castillo pushed her cleaning cart down the empty hallway. The pristine marble floors reflected her tired face, brown eyes lined with fatigue, dark hair secured tightly in a practical bun. At 32, she had mastered the art of invisibility among the wealthy patrons and gifted students who walked these halls. "Ms. Castillo," called a voice that made her spine stiffen, "the practice room in the East Wing needs attention before tonight's donor reception." Dean Whitaker stood with perfect posture, his salt and pepper hair styled immaculately. He didn't wait for her response before checking his watch, a timepiece worth more than her yearly salary. "Of course," she said, her slight accent barely perceptible after years of careful practice. The practice room was her favorite place in the entire academy. 12 grand pianos, each worth more than a house, stood in perfect formation like soldiers, awaiting command. The windows overlooked Central Park, now golden in the late afternoon sun. She ran her cloth over the nearest Steinway, movements efficient from years of practice. The room would soon host the Academy's most important donors, and several world-renowned pianists who would perform to loosen wealthy wallets. "Remember, Ms. Castillo," Dean Whitaker's voice startled her from the doorway, "the reception begins at 8. Make yourself scarce after 7. The door closed before she could respond. A familiar heaviness settled in her chest as she finished polishing the last piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys, not touching, never touching during working hours, but feeling the phantom weight of them. The magnetic pull was almost painful. Just once, she thought, just once to feel them again before they come. She glanced at her watch. 6:30. She had time. Mira sat at the bench, back straight as a rod, the way her grandmother had taught her. In their tiny apartment in Manila before everything changed, before the storm, before America, before survival replaced dreams, her fingers descended like rain. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room, not the simplified version taught to intermediate students, but the full, complex cascade of emotion that had once made her a prodigy in another life. Her fingers remembered what her mind tried to forget. She didn't hear the door open. "What do you think you're doing?" The voice cut through the music like a knife. Mira's hands jerked away from the keys as if burned. Veronica Harrington, the Academy's star pianist and daughter of its founder, stood in the doorway, eyebrows raised in amused disdain. "I'm sorry, I was just playing?" Veronica laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "That's adorable. Weren't you supposed to be cleaning?" Heat crawled up Mira's neck as she stood, smoothing her uniform with trembling hands. "The room is prepared for tonight's event. I was just finishing." Veronica glided into the room, her designer dress whispering against the floor. "Well, at least you didn't damage the instrument. These are extremely valuable. They're not toys for the help to play with." Each word landed like a slap. "Of course, excuse me." Mira grabbed her cart and hurried toward the door. "Oh, and Miss Castillo," Veronica called after her, "if you want to hear real music, feel free to listen from the hallway tonight. It might be educational." Mira nodded stiffly and escaped, the weight of humiliation pressing against her chest until it was hard to breathe. In the storage closet, where she kept her belongings, she changed quickly into street clothes, jeans and a plain sweater that would help her blend into the city. As she retrieved her backpack, her hand brushed against the worn envelope tucked in the side pocket. The Metropolitan International Piano Competition. Application deadline, tomorrow. She'd filled it out weeks ago during her lunch break, a moment of madness or hope. She wasn't sure which. But after tonight's encounter, the very idea seemed ridiculous. Who was she to compete with properly trained musicians who hadn't spent the last decade cleaning floors? Still, she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. The second incident came 3 days later, Mira was restocking the bathrooms near the main recital hall when she heard raised voices from inside. Curious, she paused. "I just don't understand why we need to host a public competition here," came Veronica's distinctive voice, sharp with irritation. "The Metropolitan should use a concert hall, not an academy." "Because," Dean Whitaker responded, patiently, "your father believes in community outreach. Opening our doors to talented pianists from all backgrounds brings good publicity." Mira inched closer to the doorway. "All backgrounds," Veronica scoffed. "Have you seen some of the applicants? Last year there was a bus driver from Queens." "Who was quite talented, as I recall," came a deeper voice. "Professor Chen, the Academy's most respected instructor. Talented compared to other bus drivers. Perhaps, Veronica said, but hardly Harrington material." Mira's grip tightened on the supply cart. Her application sat completed in her backpack, needing only the courage to submit it. "The competition is open to all," Professor Chen insisted. "Music doesn't care about pedigree." "Easy for you to say. You were trained at Juilliard," Veronica countered. Mira leaned forward to hear better when disaster struck. Her cart bumped against the door, pushing it open. She stood frozen in the doorway, 3 pairs of eyes turning to stare at her. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I was just eavesdropping." Veronica finished, eyes narrowing. "No, Ms. Castillo is here to clean," Dean Whitaker interrupted smoothly. "Aren't you?" Professor Chen's kind eyes lingered on her face. "Of course she is," Veronica smirked. "Well, since you're here, the practice room I used this morning could use attention. Someone spilled coffee near the piano." "Right away," Mira said, willing her voice not to shake. As she turned to leave, Veronica called after her, "Oh, and I left some sheet music out. Don't touch it. I doubt you can read it anyway." Professor Chen frowned. "Veronica, that's unnecessary." Veronica shrugged. Just being practical. Wouldn't want anything important misplaced. The second humiliation burned hotter than the first, witnessed by others who said nothing. As Mira hurried away, she heard Veronica continue their conversation as if nothing had happened, as if Mira were truly invisible. In the practice room, she found the coffee spill and the scattered sheet music. Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically challenging pieces in piano literature. "I played this when I was 17, she thought, carefully gathering the pages without allowing herself to linger on them. That night, in her tiny studio apartment in Washington Heights, she pulled out her keyboard, an electric Yamaha with weighted keys that was her one indulgence. She played La Campanella from memory, fingers flying across the keys with the muscle memory that never quite left her. When she finished, she stared at the Metropolitan competition application on her table. With sudden resolve, she signed the final page and slipped it into an envelope. Whatever happened next, she would no longer be invisible to herself. The third humiliation came the following week, as inevitable as rain. Mira had submitted her application and requested the day off for the preliminary auditions. She had told no one at Harrington, planning to slip in and out unnoticed among the 100 other hopeful contestants. What she hadn't anticipated was being assigned the last audition slot of the day, or that the preliminary judges would include both Professor Chen and Dean Whitaker himself. She sat in the back of Harrington's smallest recital hall, watching contestant after contestant perform their selected pieces. Most were young, conservatory-trained, confident in their belonging. A few were older, piano teachers, church musicians, talented amateurs pursuing a dream. None were custodial staff. When only 3 contestants remained before her turn, disaster struck. Veronica Harrington swept into the hall with a cluster of friends, taking seats near the front to watch the final auditions. Mira shrank in her seat, but knew discovery was inevitable. Her name was called Mira Castillo. She stood on shaky legs, aware of the whispers that followed her to the stage. As she approached the gleaming grand piano, she saw the exact moment recognition dawned on Veronica's face. The young woman's mouth fell open, then curved into a disbelieving smile. She leaned to whisper something to her companion, who glanced back at Mira with poorly concealed amusement. Professor Chen looked surprised but not unkind. Dean Whitaker's expression was unreadable. "Miss Castillo," he said, "this is unexpected." She nodded. unable to find her voice. "You understand this competition requires professional-level skill," he continued. "Perhaps you'd prefer to withdraw your application?" The whispers grew louder. Someone laughed. Veronica raised her hand like a student. "Dean Whitaker, if I may. Perhaps Miss Castillo would be more comfortable cleaning the piano rather than playing." "Say it." The laughter that followed was the final humiliation, open, unashamed mockery that echoed in the perfect acoustics of the hall. Mira stood frozen, the weight of their judgment pressing down on her shoulders. For a moment, she considered walking away. It would be easier. Expected. Instead, she sat at the bench. "I'll be playing Bach's Prelude and Fugue in a minor, followed by Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor," she said quietly. Dean Whitaker raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Proceed." Mira closed her eyes, finding the center of stillness her grandmother had taught her. "The moment before music begins is sacred," she heard her grandmother say. "It is the breath between worlds." She took that breath and played. The Bach prelude flowed from her fingers like water, precise, controlled, each note articulated with crystal clarity. The fugue followed, her hands weaving the complex counterpoint with mathematical precision that belied her lack of formal training. She didn't look at the audience, didn't need to. The shocked silence told her everything. Without pausing, she transitioned to Chopin, and here she finally released the emotion she'd held contained for so long. The ballad spoke of loss, of longing, of a homeland remembered only in dreams, and the ghostly echoes of her grandmother's voice guiding her hands. The technical challenges that had made students stumble all day disappeared beneath her fingers. Arpeggios cascaded like waterfalls. Delicate pianissimo passages whispered secrets. The thunderous climax shook the room. When the final note faded, Mira opened her eyes. Professor Chen's mouth hung slightly open. Dean Whitaker sat rigid, his pen frozen above his notes, and Veronica's face had drained of color, her expression a mixture of shock and something darker. Absolute silence filled the hall. Then Professor Chen stood and began to applaud. Others joined hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm until the applause thundered through the room. Someone in the back whistled. Dean Whitaker remained seated, but nodded once, a slight inclination of his head that somehow meant more than the applause. "Where?" he asked when the noise finally subsided. "Did you study?" Mira's voice found strength. "My grandmother taught me until I was 12, in the Philippines. After that, I taught myself." "Impossible," Veronica blurted. Her face had flushed. Deep red, eyes too bright. "No one teaches themselves to play like that." "And yet," Professor Chen said softly, "we all heard it." Mira stood from the bench on shaky legs. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The reality of what she'd done, stepping out of invisibility into this blinding light, made her dizzy. "Thank you for the opportunity," she managed, uncertain what else to say. As she walked off stage, people stared openly. Someone reached out to touch her arm in congratulation. Words floated around her. "Extraordinary," and "Where did she come from?" and "Did you know?" In the hallway, she pressed her back against the cool wall and closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. The door opened beside her and she tensed, expecting Veronica or Dean Whitaker. Instead, Professor Chen stood there, eyes bright with something she couldn't name. "Ms. Castillo," he said, "the judges would like to speak with you. Privately." She followed him to a small office where Dean Whitaker waited alone. His face remained impassive, but his voice had lost its dismissive edge. "Your performance was—" He paused, searching for words. "Unexpected." She said nothing. "The judges are still reviewing all candidates, but I think it's appropriate to tell you that you will advance to the finals." Relief made her knees weak. "Thank you. However," he continued, "I must ask, why are you working as custodial staff when you possess this level of talent?" The question held genuine confusion, as if the idea of poverty constraining potential was foreign to him. "My family came here after a typhoon destroyed our home," she said simply. "My grandmother died shortly after. There was no money for music school. There was only survival." Dean Whitaker looked uncomfortable. "But surely there were scholarships, programs, For a teenage immigrant with no formal training and no connections? She shook her head. I applied. Many times. Including here, Professor Chen said quietly. It wasn't a question, she nodded. 3 times, the last time was 8 years ago. Dean Whitaker's expression tightened. I see. But you still play, Professor Chen observed, after all this time. Music isn't something you do, she said. It's something you are. A soft knock interrupted them. The door opened to reveal Veronica, composed once more but with a tightness around her mouth that hadn't been there before. I apologize for the interruption, she said stiffly. I wanted to personally congratulate Ms. Castillo on her performance. The words sounded rehearsed, empty. Thank you, Mira replied, equally formal. Veronica hesitated, then added, I was wondering if you might consider playing at the donor reception next week, as a performer, not as staff. Dean Whitaker's eyebrows rose in surprise. Professor Chen smiled faintly. The invitation, however reluctantly given, was a concession, an acknowledgement. Mira weighed her response carefully. I appreciate the offer, she said, but I have preparation to do for the competition finals. Veronica's lips pressed into a thin line. She nodded once and left without another word. Well, Professor Chen said into the silence that followed, it seems things are changing. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Professor Chen offered her access to practice rooms during off hours. A competition finalist should have proper facilities, he insisted. She reduced her work hours to part-time, using her meager savings to cover the difference. Word spread quickly among the students and faculty. Some treated her with newfound respect, others with suspicion. Most simply seemed unsure how to categorize. Her now, neither fully staff nor student. Veronica avoided her entirely. The night of the finals arrived with startling speed. The competition had drawn media attention, partly due to the custodian prodigy story that someone had leaked to the press. Mira had declined all interviews, focusing instead on the music. Backstage at Carnegie Hall, she sat alone, hands folded in her lap. The other 5 finalists paced or practiced fingerings or chatted nervously with their mentors. She had no mentor, no fancy conservatory training to fall back on, only her grandmother's voice in her memory, and the music burned into her muscles through thousands of hours of solitary practice. Ms. Castillo. She looked up to find Professor Chen holding 2 cups of tea. For nerves, he explained, offering one to her. Thank you. The warmth of the cup steadied her hands. The judges are particularly interested in your Rachmaninoff, he said conversationally. It's not a conventional interpretation, she nodded. I know. Most would play it with more aggression. Most didn't learn it watching their grandmother play. By candlelight during typhoon season, she replied. To her it was never about power. It was about survival. He studied her over his tea. You could have a remarkable career, you know. Your story combined with your talent, it's compelling. I don't want to be compelling, she said quietly. I just want to play. A stagehand appeared. 10 minutes, Ms. Castillo. Professor Chen stood. Remember what your grandmother taught you. The rest is just noise. When she walked on stage, the lights blinded her to the audience, but she knew they were there. Hundreds of people waiting to judge her, to categorize her, to determine her worth. Among them would be critics, patrons, directors of prestigious music programs, Dean Whitaker, Veronica. The massive Steinway waited, its polished surface reflecting the stage lights like water. How many times had she cleaned pianos like this one, running her cloth over keys she wasn't permitted to play? Mira sat, centered herself, and began. The Rachmaninoff prelude in G minor started softly, contrary to most interpretations. She built it slowly, like a gathering storm, each note deliberate. When the thunderous middle section arrived, she played not with showy virtuosity, but with the controlled power of someone who understood that true strength comes from precision, not force. The music spoke of loss and resilience, of dreams deferred, but never abandoned, of invisibility transformed into presence. When the final chord faded, the hall erupted. Later, she would remember little of the ceremony that followed. The announcement that she had won first place, the weight of the medal around her neck, the check that would cover 3 years of proper lessons. The card slipped into her hand by a representative from Deutsche Grammophon, who whispered, "Call me tomorrow." What she would remember was Dean Whittaker's face as he shook her hand, genuinely pleased but slightly bemused, as if recalibrating his understanding of the world. And Veronica, standing slightly behind him, face carefully composed, except for her eyes, which couldn't quite hide her disbelief. "Congratulations, Miss Castillo," Dean Whittaker said formally. "Harrington Academy is proud to have you as part of our community." The hesitation spoke volumes. She was no longer just the cleaning woman, but she wasn't quite one of them either. She existed in a new, undefined space. "Thank you," she replied. "I appreciate the support." Professor Chen approached next, beaming. "They've offered you a scholarship," he said without preamble. "Full tuition starting immediately." The scholarship, the same one she'd been denied 3 times before, now offered freely. "To study piano performance?" she asked. He nodded. "Unless you'd prefer a different program?" Veronica stepped forward then, extending her hand with obvious effort. "Congratulations," she said stiffly. "Your playing was impressive." Mira accepted the handshake. "Thank you. I hope," Veronica added, voice lower, "that there are no hard feelings about our previous interactions. I didn't know that I could play," Mira finished for her, "or that I deserved basic respect regardless." Veronica flushed before she could respond. They were interrupted by photographers wanting pictures of the winner. The moment passed, but Mira carried the question with her through the evening celebrations and back to her apartment, where she placed the medal on her small kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. 6 months later, Mira sat in a recording studio, fingers poised over a Steinway that had been selected specifically for this session. Her debut album, a collection of Filipino classical compositions rarely heard outside her homeland, was nearly complete. The scholarship to Harrington remained untouched. She had declined it politely but firmly. "I don't need a degree to validate what I already am," she had told Professor Chen over coffee, "but I would welcome the opportunity to teach master classes on Filipino classical tradition." He had smiled at that. "I believe we can arrange something." The cleaning cart was gone, replaced by concert tours and studio sessions. Her tiny apartment had given way to a still modest but comfortable 2-bedroom with space for a proper piano. Her mother would be joining her from Manila next month. When she finished the recording session, her phone showed 3 missed calls: her new agent, a concert hall in Tokyo, and the director of a music program for immigrant children in Queens, where she volunteered weekly. As she packed up her music, a text message appeared from Professor Chen. "Veronica asked if you might consider a joint recital next spring. Your choice of program." Mira smiled slightly. Growth came in unexpected ways. Outside the studio, reporters waited. The story of the custodian turned virtuoso still held public fascination. She answered their questions patiently, neither hiding her past nor allowing it to overshadow her. "Present, what would you tell others like you?" a young journalist asked. "People with talent who feel invisible?" Mira considered the question carefully. "Talent doesn't need permission to exist," she said finally. "Only opportunity to be heard. And if no one offers you that opportunity, sometimes you must create it yourself, even when your hands are calloused from other work, even when the world has taught you to be silent. Especially then." The true measure of value was never in the judgment of others, she had learned, but in the quiet certainty of knowing yourself. The music had always been inside her, whether anyone listened or not. The difference now was that she had given herself permission to be heard. And that, perhaps, was the most virtuosic act of all.